You're listening to the Dibbly Dobbly Podcast. Remember to like, share, comment, subscribe, and click the bell to make sure you get the latest episodes of the podcast. Be sure to like and share our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter and on Instagram. Hi everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Dibbly Dobbly Podcast. And on today's episode of the podcast, we're reviewing the first test of this Border-Gavaskar Trophy between Australia and India. And you have to say, it was a pretty up and down test match, full of twists and turns, and the game ebbed and flowed. But in the end, India delivered a crushing defeat to Australia by 295 runs to take a 1-0 series lead in their quest to win their third consecutive test series in Australia and to hold on to the Border-Gavaskar Trophy. And it was an impressive performance by India. They failed in the first innings with the bat, but they came back in the second innings to deliver the killer blow to Australia. And Australia, by the end of this test match, were pretty much wounded on their knees and pretty much looking forward to the next test in Adelaide. For Australia, nothing went right at all. They were outplayed in every department, bat, ball, and in the field. The bowlers stood up, which was a positive, but the batters failed. In the first innings in particular, being bowled out for 104, which was a disappointing result. But the second innings, I suppose, they showed a bit of fight to take it to day four, late on day four, to make India work hard to take those remaining wickets. But nonetheless, it was a crushing defeat for Australia. There's plenty of work to do to bounce back, pick themselves up from this disappointing test match. But as we say, it's only one test match. It was a bad day in the office for Australia, but there's an opportunity to bounce back for the second test in Adelaide. But it was a very disappointing performance by Australia, it had to be said. Very disappointing with the batting in particular, which we will talk about in this review of the first test today, in today's episode. So without further ado, let's get straight into it. And first of all, have a look at the match summary and how this game panned out. The first test match of this Border-Gavaskar Trophy between Australia and India from Perth at the Perth Stadium. And India batted first and made 150 all out in their first innings. Nitish Kumar Reddy top scored with 41. Josh Hazlewood took 4 wickets for Australia. Australia were bowled out for 104 in response to India's first innings, all out for 104. Mitchell Starc top scored with 26. Jasprit Bumrah took 5 wickets to bowl Australia out for 104. The second innings, India finished on 6 for 487 declared in their second innings. Jaiswal top scored with 161, and Nathan Lyon took 2 wickets for Australia. Australia needed a improbable 534 runs to win. They were bowled out for 238. Travis Head top scored with 89. Jasprit Bumrah and Mohammad Siraj took 3 wickets each for India. India won by 295 runs, and Jasprit Bumrah, rightly so, was named the player of the match. So that's how the first test match of this Border-Gavaskar Trophy panned out in Perth. And India winning by 295 runs, a crushing defeat nonetheless for Australia, but a very good victory for India. Now, what were some of the key moments and key factors that ultimately decided this first test match in favour of India and led to them winning this test match? Well, there were a couple of key moments and factors really that were the telling moments in this test match. Obviously, Jasprit Bumrah's 5 for 30 in the first innings, which was very important for India to get back into the test match after being bowled out for 150. They needed something special, and they got that from Bumrah. And his spell, his figures of 5 for 30 got India back in the test match. India bowled Australia out for 104, and that gave India a very crucial first innings lead of only 46 runs. But nonetheless, it was very crucial in the context of this game. And then the other key moment that really decided this match in India's favour was the opening partnership between Jaiswal and KL Rahul, 201 for the first wicket. And that was key to set up the second innings for India and to extend their lead beyond 500 to make it hard for Australia to try and win the test match, let alone try to draw it as well. So those two moments were very pivotal in terms of this test match going into India's favour. And there were some of the key factors and key moments from this first test match of the Border-Gavaskar Trophy between Australia and India from the Perth Stadium. Now, let's talk about how both Australia and India performed in this first test match of the Border-Gavaskar Trophy. Talk about their performances overall and where it went right and wrong for both teams. We'll start with Australia and talk about their performance. A below par performance, it has to be said. Very disappointing, in particular, the batting. And yet again, Australia's batting woes continue. Top order failed, the middle order failed in the first innings, and it was the tail enders that stood up in the first innings. In particular, Mitchell Starc and Josh Hazlewood in that 10th wicket partnership. But really a rundown of Australia's batting. The first innings, 104 all out in response to India's 150 in the first innings. Wasn't a good result. Conceded a 46-run lead, which was not good. Obviously, Jasprit Bumrah was the kryptonite for Australia's batters in the first innings. He took 5 for 30 and the top order had no answers to his bowling. The only real highlight for Australia in the first innings was Starc and Hazlewood. The 10th wicket partnership was the highest partnership of the innings. 25 got Australia above 100. Australia were 9 for 79 when they came together and got them over 100, which I suppose was a good result in the end for Australia, but it was a pretty ordinary batting performance. The second innings, though, was a much better batting performance by Australia. 238 all out. Obviously chasing an improbable target of 534, which was never going to happen. But for Australia, it was important for them to try and bat as long as they can, or bat 2 days to try and save the game. They didn't do that, but they did take it to the last session on day 4, which I suppose is a positive. They batted a bit better, but the positives were Travis Head scored 89, Marsh 47, Carey 36. Very important for those three in the middle order to score runs, not only in this test match, but for the test series to come, in terms of the test matches to come in this test series. Steve Smith looked good for his 17 until he got out. Got a good ball by Siraj. But other than that, for Australia, it was another underwhelming batting performance. Again, in the second innings, they lost early wickets and they were put on the back foot immediately. So that was a bit of a snapshot of Australia's batting across the 2 innings of this test match. The batting woes continue. As we saw last summer, the batting struggled again in this first test match. The batting has struggled again, which was disappointing. Some of the negatives for Australia with their batting, they lacked partnerships. Wickets fell in clumps. They had batting collapses. No one really scored a significant score of note in the first innings in particular, but in the second innings, Travis Head did. He scored 89. They pretty much lacked intent with the bat. You know, they didn't have that good intent or positive intent. There was no answers to Bumrah. Top order failed. Lack of footwork from the batters, especially in the first innings. No one went forward or back. They were stuck on the crease. The shot selection was poor. The decision-making was poor as well. So those were some of the negatives with Australia's batting. The positives with Australia's batting were the runs scored by Head, Marsh and Carey in the second innings. That was the positive in terms of their batting in the second innings. Those three getting runs, which is important for Australia going forward in this series, that the middle order gets some runs. And that was the case last summer as well, that the middle order, Head, Marsh and Carey, got Australia out of a jam a few times last summer against Pakistan and the West Indies. So it's good for them to score runs in this first test match of this series against India. And that's pretty much about it, really, for Australia's batting. It was pretty poor across the board, and they will be very disappointed with how they batted in this match. And yeah, it was pretty underwhelming, obviously. So all of them are under pressure in terms of Khawaja. Obviously, Nathan McSweeney, I think we can cut him some slack a little bit. It's his first test match. He was on debut. A very hard experience for him trying to face Bumrah. And I believe he got out to Bumrah twice in this match, and he did. He got out to Bumrah twice, LBW, in this test match. So something for McSweeney to work on there in terms of combating that for the second test in Adelaide. Usman Khawaja would have been disappointed with his return in this match. He only scored 12 runs across the 2 innings. Steve Smith got a good ball in the first innings to Bumrah, out for a golden duck. The second innings, he looked pretty good for his 17 up until he got that good delivery from Siraj. They got the outside edge. Travis Head in the second innings was pretty good. Mitchell Marsh as well. Carey was good across both innings, actually. 21 in the first innings, 36 in the second. So, yeah, Australia's batters, a lot of questions to answer, a lot of work to do going into Adelaide. But the big talking point for Australia is Marnus Labuschagne. He's only scored 5 runs in this test match, and pretty much in the spotlight, Marnus. Obviously, it's no secret that Marnus is suffering a bit of a form slump. His numbers since 2019 have gone down significantly. He got out LBW both innings of this test match to Siraj in the first innings and Bumrah in the second. So a lot spoken about Marnus, obviously. And I think for Marnus, his comments before this test match were that I'm going to bat like Pujara. I'm going to be the guy that's going to bat like Pujara, someone who can do that, someone can hold up an end and pretty much get Australia into good positions. Well, he lived up to that expectation in the first innings. He faced 52 balls for 2. And I got to say, that was probably the most ugliest batting I've ever seen. And it was very hard to watch. It was like someone screeching their fingernails on a blackboard and you're turning away because you can't stand the noise or that sort of cringeworthy sort of thing about it. And that was the same about Marnus's batting. He looked, like a batter that was low on confidence, low on self-belief, doubting his abilities, not wanting to get out, fearing getting out. And Marnus is a better player than that. We know Marnus Labuschagne is a better player than he showed in that first innings. I thought in the second innings, even though he didn't last long, he only made 3 runs off 5 balls. But I did see a little bit of proactivity from Marnus. He was up and about and he was looking positive. I suppose that's a good sign for him going forward into Adelaide for the second test of this series. Yeah, but for Marnus, I think it has to do with his mindset. Not so much technical with Marnus. It's more of his mindset, his mentality. Yeah, I think he's in that sort of mindset of I'm looking to survive. I don't really want to get out. I'm low on confidence. I know I need to score runs, and all batters in the game have been in that similar position to where Marnus is now, is where you start doubting yourself, you start changing things that you've gone away from that have brought you success in the past, and Marnus has done that. He's a deep thinker about the game. We all know that from Marnus. He's like Steve Smith. They're cut from the same cloth. They're deep thinkers about the game. They think hard about their game. But I think for Marnus, the important thing for him is to go back to what he has done in the past that's worked for him. And we know when Marnus is at his absolute best, he's looking to score. He's looking to be busy. And we didn't see that from Marnus. I think Virat Kohli on the stump mics in the first inning said, Marnus, are you going to use your bat? You got a cricket bat in your hand. You're not using it. And Virat was exactly right. Marnus did not use that. Did not use his bat at all. So I think for Marnus, it's a mindset thing that he needs to change going into Adelaide and for the remainder of the series. He knows that he's under pressure. If he has a pretty poor test match in Adelaide, I think I think Australia may, probably drop him. And probably for Marnus, it wouldn't be a bad thing if he gets dropped after Adelaide, if he doesn't have a good test match. He's been in the side for a long time now, since he came back in 2019. He hasn't been dropped since, really. Not since when he made his debut, he was dropped and then obviously came back when Steve Smith was concussed in that Ashes series in England in 2019. But really for Marnus and really for Australia, they need him firing. They need him to stand up. Keep it simple. I think Marnus is overcomplicating things at the moment. And he's that sort of player that will think deeply about his performances. And in this first test match, he was certainly working hard in the nets when he got out and trying to work it out, which is good. it's good to see that Marnus is actually working on it and trying to figure out what's going wrong. It's not so much technical, it's more mental with Marnus. And he just needs to, get that self-belief back and look to be busy. I think Marnus needs to have a positive intent, look to get busy, take a leaf out of Travis Head's book and not fear getting out. We've seen Travis Head, the success that Trav has got over the last few years is because of that mindset. He doesn't care if he gets out. If he scores runs and then gets out, then so be it. So I think Marnus needs to, not bat like Pujara, as we saw in the first innings, but be himself in terms of what he's done before. Go back to that and see if that will work and that will bring different results. So he's definitely the biggest talking point coming out of this test match from an Australian perspective. Obviously, Kawaj is under the pump a little bit. Steve Smith as well. But the one that's really under the pump now is Marnus Labuschagne in terms of your number 3. Your number 3 has to really bat well. It's the important position in the batting order. And what we saw in this first test from Marnus, especially the first innings, was not the innings that you expect from a number 3 batter in the Australian cricket team. It was absolutely horrible to watch. And it wasn't like Marnus at all. And he's a better player than that. And he knows that too. So he needs to turn it around pretty quickly. And Australia in particular, they need the players to stand up. They need Khawaja to stand up. They need Smith to stand up in particular. They need Marnus to stand up for the next test in Adelaide. And Australia can learn a lot from what India did in the second innings. The partnership with Jaiswal and KL Rahul, that was good test match partnership batting. They did the basics. They soaked up a lot of balls. They soaked up pressure. They pounced on anything that was loose from the Australian bowlers. They took their time. They rotated the strike. Even defensive shots, they were looking to score runs. On the other hand, with Australia, when we saw that from Australia, when they played a defensive shot, they weren't looking for runs. They weren't looking to rotate strike. And they dug themselves into a bit of a hole, especially in that first innings. And they allowed the pressure to build and build. And whenever that happens, it's always going to crack and the elastics is going to split. So Australia need to work on the basics, really, with their batting, good partnerships, making sure you rotate strike, being positive, someone getting a big score, someone getting a start and going on with it. You need that. And they certainly need that in Adelaide. They need their key players, their senior players, Khawaja, Labuschagne and Smith to stand up especially. And it's also good signs that Head, Marsh and Carey scored runs in this test match. So if they can get the top order firing and the middle order scoring some runs as well, then Australia will be more than happy with that and confident that they have enough runs to give the bowlers to try and defend or put India under some sort of pressure in the next test and for the remainder of the series. So Australia can definitely learn a lot from what India did in their second innings. And that's so important in the game of cricket. You always learn from your opposition and learn what they've done better so you can implement those changes and improvements. But Australia's batting overall was pretty poor, very underwhelming, not a surprise given the last few months in particular, and especially what happened last summer. So they've got a lot of work to do, Australia. They weren't at their best with the bat. And, when you get bowled out for 104, that was an opportunity that they let slip. You can't allow India off the hook. You bowled India out for 150. You should be really putting them under pressure with a good first innings score, especially in the game that we all thought was going to be a low-scoring match. The pitch, to be honest, did a little bit on day one. I think both sides will probably reflect and say, on that first day where 17 wickets fell, the pitch did a little bit. The ball moved around a little bit. It wasn't unplayable. It was just probably a mixture of factors, probably nerves, given that it's the first day of a big series. Both batting units are not quite firing as well. They have their weaknesses and frailties. So I think both teams would be disappointed about how that first day went in this test match. And the second innings, it got better and the pitch changed and conditions changed. So going back to Australia in terms of their batting, they've got to find answers to Bumrah. They've got to make sure that they can keep him pretty quiet. looking to put him under some sort of pressure, and then they can target the other bowlers. So they've got to work out all these things, Australia. If they don't, then they're in more trouble. But if they do have a chance of going back and coming back into this series. So from a batting perspective, disappointing. But I suppose in the second innings, we saw some positives in terms of, taking it deep into the day in day 4, making India work hard to take those wickets. That's a positive. The runs scored by Head and Carey and Marsh was a positive in the second innings. So you've got to take the small wins despite a lot of negatives with the batting for Australia. The bowling side of things, the bowlers toiled hard in this test match. They bowled a lot of overs and were rewarded in the first innings. They bowled well, Australia, on day 1, 150 all out India. They used the conditions well. The ball did a little bit. Bowled India out for just under 50 overs for 150. But that's where it changed in the second innings. Things changed. The pitch got a bit easier to bat on. The Indian batting lineup piled on the runs, and Australia had a pretty tough couple of days in the field, bowling for 130 odd overs. And India piled on 6 for 487 declared. The bowlers struggled immensely in that second innings. But I suppose, from an Australian perspective, Pat Cummins was underwhelming with the ball in this test match. He wasn't quite at his best. I thought Mitchell Starc and Josh Hazlewood were exceptional, bowling in both innings. They bowled pretty well. Obviously, Starc's figures in the second innings don't reflect how well he bowled at times, but Josh Hazlewood was the standout in both innings, 4 for 29 and 1 for 28. It just shows you how good he bowled in this test match. He's probably one of the pick of the bowlers for Australia in this whole entire game. But Australia struggled in the field. Probably they were missing Cameron Green's impact, especially in the second innings where the pitch got a bit flatter and the Indian batters got in and got set and ball wasn't doing much. It was soft, sort of missing Cameron Green's impactful bowling. But Australia have to make do with what they had in terms of their part-time bowlers and Mitchell Marsh and obviously Labuschagne and Travis Head, especially in that second innings. In that second innings, took until the 63rd over to take their first wicket, which is probably the longest that this Australian bowling attack of Hazlewood, Lyon, Starc and Cummins have taken that long to take the first wicket of an innings, which is some sort of new record. It just shows you how well KL Rahul and Jaiswal batted in that opening partnership to blunt this Australian attack. And obviously the pitch helped out a little bit as well. The body language was poor. I know some people were questioning that from afar. Greg Blewett made some comments about the Australian body language in the field. It was pretty poor, especially at the start of the Indian innings. They didn't have that intensity. They didn't have that intent. They weren't looking to attack. Unlike with India, where Australia were about to bat Bumrah in that spell, India were up and about. We didn't see that with Australia in the start of the second innings for India. And obviously the body language will go down a bit, especially when you're out in the field for 134 overs and the opposition is piling on the runs in conditions that were pretty oppressive in terms of the heat. Of course, your body language is going to be a bit down a bit. So that's very important for Australia. Looking forward to Adelaide is to improve the body language, to improve the mindset in the field. The fielding at times was poor. We saw a drop catch from Usman Khawaja at first slip in the second innings. I think it was off either KL Rahul or Jaiswal. I don't recall, but it was one of those two. I think it was KL Rahul. He dropped that catch at slip. There was an overthrow at one stage, I think. And Australia just struggled a little bit in the field there. So they need to pick up that intensity going into Adelaide. And their tactics as well. I suppose for Australia, they could have bowled the short ball a bit more, especially to Rahul and Jaiswal, and especially to Kohli when he was in at the crease. Obviously, they allowed him to score 100, get back into some sort of his best, I suppose. Maybe could have done those tactics a bit more with the short ball. So Australia would have learnt a lot from this bowling performance in this first test. But it's all about just, trying to figure out what can we do better going into Adelaide. And I think, probably bowling the short ball a little bit more to test the Indian batters out, and just being up in the field, lifting the intensity and the body language. Obviously, your body language and your attitude is important in the field. It really sets the tone. It reaffirms to the opposition that we're up and about. We really mean business. So Australia really need to pick that up going into Adelaide. We want to see that positive intent in the field and that aggressive mindset in the field as well. So the bowling overall for Australia was good in the first innings. The second innings, they bowled well at times. Obviously, a long slog in the field in the second innings, but I suppose that builds resilience and character. And certainly we know from this Australian bowling attack is that they do have the ability to fight through tough periods. And that's what they did in this test match, especially the second innings, where they had to bowl pretty long spells to try and get wickets. And it was a bit difficult. But I suppose every team has those moments in the field where things don't quite go right. But for Australia's bowling, pretty good in the first innings, as you would expect from the attack that they have in Cummins, Stark, Lyon and Hazelwood. But in the second innings, there was some problems that they need to address going into Adelaide. Positive body language in the field. The fielding needs to improve. The mindset and probably tactics. Probably try different plans. Maybe bowl a bit more of the short ball to test out the Indian batters. And just put that in the back of their mind that will hopefully bring about wickets for Australia going forward. So there's plenty of work to do for Australia across the board overall, with the batting and with the bowling side of things going into the second test in Adelaide. But a very disappointing performance nonetheless from Australia, and they've got a lot of work to do to bounce back in the series. So that's Australia. Let's move on and talk about India. Talk about their performance across this test match with bat and ball. And first of all, let's talk about their batting performance. It was a bit of a mixture of two contrasting innings for India. There was some good batting in the second innings, but the first innings was pretty ordinary, bowled out for 150, below par, struggled with a bit of movement in the pitch. They won the toss. Bumrah, fill-in captain for Rohit Sharma, won the toss and said, we'll have a bat first on a pitch that did a little bit. And they struggled with that, the Indian batters, and they weren't able to produce a score of significant note. But in the second innings, they were able to bounce back, and the pitch dramatically changed in terms of conditions. And they were able to bounce back in the second innings, all thanks to a superb partnership between Jaiswal and KL Rahul of 201, which is India's highest opening partnership in test matches in Australia, which is a superb record indeed. It just shows you how well they batted. Obviously, Virat Kohli returned to form and scored 100. And, 6 for 487 declared in the second innings, set Australia 534 to win. It was a pretty dominant batting display by India, and they bounced back superbly, which is the remarkable thing, really. Whenever a side gets bowled out for 150 and produce a comeback of this note, just shows you how monumental this achievement was for India to win this test match. When you're bowled out for 150 in the first innings, you're behind in the game, you're behind the 8 ball. You really got to bat better in the second innings, and you hope that the team batting second doesn't get a first innings lead. And that's what happened. India were able to bowl well, bowled Australia out for 104, get a 46-run lead, and the batters did their job. I was very impressed with young Jaiswal. I think he's a serious player, 161. His story is incredible as well, a testament to his resilience and fight and his commitment and work ethic that he wants to play cricket for India. And I think that translates into his play as well. He played some glorious shots. You name it, every shot in the book. Even when he brought up his century, he brought it up with a 6, which is not a surprise, especially from young players. with the modern age, especially with T20 cricket. Not a surprise to see that happen. But, his story, his resilience and fight, it comes into his batting. He's hungry for runs. And early on in his Test career, he's got a double century. He's got a few big centuries, even this one against Australia. It just shows that hunger and commitment that he has to score runs. He's worked so hard to get to this position that he's in. All the sacrifices, moving away from his family, not eating for days on end, wanting to work hard at his game, living with his coach who took him in as his own son. It just shows you that good things come to good people. And certainly for Jaiswal, that is the case. Very impressive. He's going to go a long way, this kid. He's in his early 20s. He's got the talent. He's got the skills. He was disappointed to get out in the first innings for a duck. He's learnt from the first innings and he implemented that in the second innings. He left the ball so well and, just waited and had patience. There were a few times where he got a little bit impatient, but I suppose that was the importance of having a senior player at the other end like KL Rahul come down to him and say, hey, it's all right. Be a little bit patient. Let's just refocus and keep doing what we're doing, which kept Jaiswal on track, which was a good thing for Jaiswal to have Rahul at the other end to, have those words of encouragement. He was definitely the standout. KL Rahul as well. He's had a bit of an up and down career. 77. I thought he batted well in both innings. I thought he was the standout batter in the first innings for India, the way that he was patient and were able to weather the storm. He was a bit disappointed to get out. Obviously, the controversial caught behind decision with DRS. Obviously, Snicko, did it match up and all that stuff. But anyway, that's all in the past now because India won this test match, so it doesn't really matter in the end. But he batted pretty well in the second innings, really. Rahul, that partnership with Jaiswal set it up for India. And Virat Kohli, what can we say about him? He got out. It was a pretty ugly dismissal that he got out to by Josh Hazlewood in the first innings, got out for 5, caught by Khawaja at first slip. But in the second innings, Virat Kohli going in with no pressure because of the start that India had with the opening partnership with Jaiswal and Rahul. The start that India had, India being miles in front of the game, Virat Kohli came out. He had no pressure whatsoever. He was able to score freely, got a bit of confidence back, and we saw the old Virat Kohli in front of our eyes. And the old saying goes, form is temporary, class is permanent. And Virat Kohli is a class player. He loves playing against Australia. His record in Australia is superb. Another 100 in Australian conditions, 100 not out. And certainly for Virat, contrast it back in 2018-19, where he scored 100 here in Perth as well. And 6 years later, he's done it again. He's redeemed himself. After all what was said about him, all the fans saying, oh, he's too old, he's past it, time to retire. I think people would change their mind after this innings from Virat Kohli in terms how quickly people can change their minds about certain things in the game of cricket. Certainly doubting players and their abilities. He may be getting on a bit in age. He's towards the latter part of his career, but he has that ability to fight back when the things are tough. And, no doubt he certainly did that in this second innings for India, which was superb. So India pretty much, bouncing back after a disappointing first innings. They batted well in the second innings. And really, it was good old-fashioned test match cricket batting. Really, the opening partnership between Jaiswal and Rahul showed that. Faced a lot of deliveries, took their time, were patient, were able to score off loose deliveries from the Australian bowlers. And they were able to rotate strike and be positive as well. And good intent. And we saw that from Virat Kohli. We saw that from Nitish Kumar Reddy towards the end of the Indian innings where they were looking to declare. Both of them went off in T20 mode. And obviously, Kohli scored his 100 and Nitish Kumar Reddy on debut had a pretty good debut, really. Took a wicket, scored runs in both innings. He'll be delighted with that. So India, despite batting well in the second innings, they still have some vulnerabilities in terms of the moving ball and, if the pitch offers a bit of something. As we saw in the first innings, they still have vulnerabilities. So they'll definitely be mindful of that, and they'll definitely work on those weaknesses, especially going into Adelaide for the day-night test, where the ball will move around under lights, the pink ball. But in the second innings, I suppose the important thing was confidence for the key batters. Jaiswal, after what happened in the first innings for a duck, scored a big 100. Virat Kohli in particular, and for him to score runs, very big pluses for India with their batting. So India's batting, second innings was good. The first innings did highlight some problems, and they need to work on those vulnerabilities going into Adelaide. But overall, a pretty good performance nonetheless. The bowling performance, let's talk about that quickly. It was pretty good, led by Jasprit Bumrah, the captain for this test match. Obviously, no Rohit Sharma. He led pretty well. He was a pretty good leader, good captain, and pretty good efforts with the ball. 5 for 30 and 3 for 42. Especially led that fight back from India, especially in the first innings when India were bowled out for 150. India needed to come back into this test match. They needed to do something special. Jasprit Bumrah said, "I'll be the person to do that." He certainly did do that. Picked up 5 for 30. His spell broke it open. India got a 46-run lead, and the rest is history. And pretty much in the second innings, they bowled pretty well. India bowled Australia out for 238. Pretty comfortable, really. But positive signs with the bowling for Australia, for India against this Australian team is that Bumrah, standout performance, 8 wickets. His spells in both innings set the tone. Siraj bowled well. Good to see him back in some form. I thought Harshit Rana was pretty good on debuts. Got something about him. 3 for 48 and 1 for 69 respectively. So I think he'll be quite happy with that test debut in his first test match for India. Kumar Reddy chipped in with a wicket there. Sundur got 2 wickets in the second innings. So I think India will be pleased with their bowling performance across the 2 innings. They just didn't really give Australia anything, really. They bowled pretty tidy. The second innings, they had to work hard for their wickets. Obviously, Australia were fighting well. But more importantly for India, they got the job done. So I think, India looking back on their bowling performance would be quite pleased with how they performed. And it's good signs for them for the remainder of the series as well. Overall bowling performance for India, pretty good. Overall team performance, pretty dominant. And worrying signs for Australia, seeing India in this sort of mood. Obviously, India coming into this series with a series loss to New Zealand. They will be delighted to hit the ground running, and hopefully they can go on and do some great things in the series. But it's only the first test match. There's still a long way to go, and there's still plenty of cricket to be played. But India, pretty pleased with their first test match performance with bat and ball. I think they will be very delighted with that. Now, let's preview the second test of this Border-Gavaskar Trophy. And the second test match will be at the Adelaide Oval for the day-night test. And Australia and India, their record here at the Adelaide Oval, head-to-head. First test match was back in 1948. 13 matches. 3 of them have been drawn. Australia have won 8 to India's 2 test matches. And the last 3 test matches played in Adelaide between Australia and India. Australia have won 2, India have won 1. 2014-15, that wonderful test match, which coincided with the sad events and the tragic passing of Philip Hughes, which was a memorable test match for Australia to win after what happened to Philip Hughes. Obviously, 10 years this year since he passed away, forever in our thoughts and forever missed by all in the cricket community. Unbelievable to think it was 10 years ago that Philip passed away. Australia won that test match by 48 runs. It was an amazing test match, especially for the Australian team to, fight back after what happened to Philip, and to do that, to go out and play in his honour was an epic victory. And then obviously 2018-19, India won by 31 runs in that test match in Adelaide. And then obviously 4 years ago now, 2020-21, Australia won by 8 wickets, and that's where India were bowled out for 36. So I don't think India will have pleasant memories coming back to Adelaide after what happened 4 years ago. But that's a bit of a snapshot of what's happened over the last 3 test matches here at the Adelaide Oval between Australia and India. Now, in terms of team selections for both teams, we'll talk about that, and we'll talk about what's going to go down. We'll start with the Australian team. I think Australia will play the same 11. Now, obviously, following this loss in Perth, people would say, everyone's going to be dropped and we're going to bring in new players. But I think Pat Cummins, as he mentioned after the game in his press conference, he said there's no need to panic. There's no need to ring the alarm bells. Yes, we haven't played well. It was an underwhelming performance. The players know what they need to do to bounce back and get back on track. So I don't think Australia will change all that much, really. We have a tendency to overreact to things like this. Probably at the end of the day, you don't need to make massive changes for the sake of it. You got to keep that cohesion. You got to keep this core group of players together. So I think Australia will play the same 11. The only question mark is Mitchell Marsh. He pulled up a bit sore, obviously not bowling for a while. Bo Webster has been recalled, or has been called up, I should say, to the Australian Test squad for this second test. He's done pretty well for Tasmania across the last 2 Sheffield Shield seasons. He's had a pretty good start to the Shield this season. He's been called in as cover for Mitchell Marsh in terms of the all-rounder option. So even if Mitchell Marsh is not fit to bowl, he may play as a specialist batter in this second test for Australia. And therefore, Australia will have to rely on Travis Head and Marnus Labuschagne to bowl overs, if that's the case. But if Mitchell Marsh has pulled up pretty well, then Australia have that all-round option with Marsh. So I think Australia will keep the same 11 for this test in Adelaide. So Khawaja, McSweeney, Labuschagne, Smith, Head, Mitchell Marsh, Carey, Cummins, Stark, Lyon and Hazelwood. So I don't think they'll make too many changes there. On the other hand, with India, they're in a pretty good spot, it has to be said. 1-0 up in the series. They've got Rohit Sharma to come back. There's a possibility that Jadeja and Ashwin may come back into the side. Shubman Gill, there's been talk about him potentially coming back. He's a bit 50-50 with the thumb injury. I don't think India need to make too many changes. It's always good to have options. I think they're in a good place having a lot of options. But when you have a lot of options, it also comes at a price. And also, it can also be a very difficult thing to try and handle, because you've got to try and make changes that you would probably think are unnecessary because you've got a lot of options to choose from. I don't think India need to change all that much, really. I think the team that they had in Perth played pretty well. Obviously, talk about Ashwin and Jadeja probably replacing Sundar, one of them. Rohit Sharma coming back. Obviously, he will come back. He will be captain and come back for this second test. Shubman Gill with that thumb injury is still in doubt. So there's a lot of thinking for the selectors to do for India. But as I said, they're in a perfect place to make changes. They can make changes if they want to. But I think it's important, for India to keep that cohesion with the team. They don't need to make too many changes because they don't need to. So you would think Rohit Sharma will come back. I think that could be the only change for India. Maybe Padikal may miss out for Rohit Sharma. Obviously, then KL Rahul comes down to bat at number 3, which Padikal did for this first test in Perth with mixed results. He got out for a duck in the first innings, but in the second innings he made some runs, 25. But KL Rahul did a very good job in this test match, obviously with his opening partnership with Jaiswal in the second innings. So it's up to India, whatever they do. But the potential 11 I sort of have for India is that Rohit Sharma will come back probably for Padikal, and that's probably it. The bowling attack's pretty good. I don't think they need to change much there. Rana, Bumrah, Siraj bowled well together. Reddy bowled a few overs, and he looked pretty good. Sundar can do a job with the ball as the sole spinner. So I don't think they need to change too much, India. Obviously, I don't think they should rush Shubman Gill in. If he's 50-50, then you can probably give him another test to get that thumb right. for the third test in Brisbane. You don't need to rush them, I don't think. So we'll wait and see. But the potential 11, in my mind, that India may take for this second test could be Jaiswal, Rohit Sharma, Rahul, Kohli, Pant, Jarrell, Sundar, Reddy, Rana, Bumrah, and Siraj. So we'll have to wait and see what the Indian selectors do. But for India, they've got a lot of options they can select and choose from, which puts them in a very good position compared to Australia, who don't have those options at the moment. Now, in terms of potentially who's going to win this test match, well, it's a very important test match, obviously, for both sides. For Australia to bounce back in the series, for India to take a 2-0 lead. So it's very important for both teams in particular. You would say India will start off as favourites, obviously, given what happened in this test match in Perth. But as we know in cricket, you start again. Both teams will start on 0. This is a new test match. It's the day-night test match. Australia will be banking on India struggling in day-night tests because they don't play a lot of them. Australia have a pretty good record in Adelaide in day-night tests. They have not lost a day-night test in Adelaide since the first one against New Zealand in 2015-16. Obviously, Australia have lost a day-night test, and that was against the West Indies at the Gabba early this year. But if we're speaking about in Adelaide, they haven't lost a day-night test. Whereas with India, they will have challenges. As we saw what happened 4 years ago when they were bowled out for 36, they do have vulnerabilities, especially against the pink ball. So I think both teams will be wary of what this test match will bring and offer in terms of the makeup of the series going forward. But what we can say is that it's probably going to be another exciting test match nonetheless. And let's hope that is the case. So I think both teams know the importance of this test match. I think for India, they will know that obviously we don't have great memories of Adelaide. Obviously what happened 4 years ago, being bowled out for 36. They don't play a lot of day-night tests. The Australian bowlers will be pretty good under lights with the pink ball. The Australian team will know that and hopefully will bounce back and hopefully implement the changes that they need to implement from the first test to the second test. But as I said, it should be an exciting test match, so we'll have to wait and see what happens. But it's always a good test match in Adelaide, especially when Australia and India play at the Adelaide Oval. So let's hope for another exciting test match in this Border-Gavaskar Trophy. Now then, some concluding thoughts and final thoughts from this first test match between Australia and India. Coming into this series, India were under the pump and have made their intentions clear with a crushing victory over Australia. Standout performances with the bat and the ball from Jaiswal, Rahul, Kohli and Bumrah have certainly improved India's chances for a quest to win a third consecutive test series victory in Australia and have started well in this series to do that. But as we know, there's still a long way to go in the series. There's still 4 test matches to go. For Australia, on the other hand, they were below their best, below par in this test match. The bowlers toiled hard, but the batters let them down and failed big time. And Australia will need to bounce back quickly for the second test in Adelaide. Not since 1968-69 that Australia have won its series after losing the first test. So they'll need to go against the grain of history to do that if they are going to win the Border-Gavaskar Trophy for the first time in 10 years. What a start to the series. This test match at Perth had it all. 17 wickets fell on day one, and then to India's run fest, and Australia crumbling in front of our eyes. Let's hope the second test at Adelaide will be another thrilling contest between India and Australia for this Border-Gavaskar Trophy. Thanks everyone for listening to our first test review of the Border-Gavaskar Trophy between Australia and India. If you're watching or listening to this episode of the podcast on our YouTube channel, let us know your thoughts on this first test of the Border-Gavaskar Trophy between Australia and India in the comments. We would love to hear what you have to say. And also make sure you subscribe to the Dibbly Dobbly Podcast YouTube channel. Click the bell to get the notifications so you don't miss out on all the episodes that we're posting of this Border-Gavaskar Trophy between Australia and India. Also join us for live streams of the test matches as well. Make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel, Dibbly Dobbly Podcast. Click the bell so you don't miss out on all of those fun episodes and live streams that we have planned for this Border-Gavaskar Trophy between Australia and India. Thanks for watching and listening. Until next time, keep safe and bye for now.